This is Andy Revkin at the Columbia Climate School. Although I'm in Wabanaki territory in Maine, coastal Maine, my office and headquarters of the Sustainability Communication Initiative, been running for several years. One of my concerns as a journalist for, oh gosh, going back 15 years has been wildfire, not just its relationship to climate change, but its relationship to community change. We've built so much in exposure and vulnerability in the West. The situation is really in a crisis mode right now, and not just here. Europe is having its own crisis. Wildfire is a global phenomenon. Australia, of course, is seen horrific years. The question on the floor today is, what's the role of technology in cutting wildfire risk? Actually, in this case, what's the role of a prize to drive technological innovation toward filling some of the gaps in how we build a more resilient, watchful, responsive approach to this fundamental element of the Earth system, fire. The X Prize folks are with me today, who have launched a new initiative. This is a recorded episode of Sustain What, but it's on the same day they're announcing this new effort. I've got Jay Stalnacker, who's the wildfire technological lead for the Wildfire Project at X Prize, and Andrea Santy, who's the program lead. What brought X Prize to this arena, this particular one?
You know, Andy, yeah, X Prize is uniquely positioned to spur innovation. And as one of the world leaders in designing innovative prizes, wildfires was an area where we really felt that we could spur innovation around one of the biggest challenges of our times. By using the prize model, we really incentivize those innovators that are already in the space, and we hope to drive new innovators. And the goal is to end destructive wildfires.
That's a pretty hefty one. And there, though, you do have these, as that little announcement there just explained, there's two tracks. Maybe Andrea, what I'd like is a little bit of a description of how you zoom in on particular spaces where you think there's a gap. And then Jay, maybe you can get at your own history and why these two components make sense.
Yeah, happy to share more. So X Prize started to develop this prize back in 2017, 2018. And the way X Prize designs prize is really through intensive research. And so there are a lot of challenges out there, and X Prize is not necessarily the intervention you're going to use for everything. But for this challenge, we really saw that there was a lot of innovation that was starting to happen. But we found that listening to the different inventors, testing was a big problem. And as you probably know, X Prize really looks at not just putting a prize out there, but having the competitors and teams develop their prize and test it along the way. And so that field testing is a part of the validation process that is just so critical to being able to show that the technology that the teams are inventing works, and allows us to then get towards our ultimate goal, which is impact and scaling. The way that this prize started to develop around two different tracks. So one track is really focused on space-based detection. This is a 22-month prize, and it is really to look at how we can improve the precision and accuracy of space-based detection, looking at improving satellites and improving coverage, especially in really hard to reach and remote places. The other track is solution agnostic, really asking people to say, what can you do to autonomously detect, respond, and suppress a wildfire in less than 10 minutes? And so two complementary tracks that are going to synergistically allow us to address different aspects of the wildfire challenge.
So Jay, bringing your background here a little bit, you've worked in the field, you've been a firefighter. So start with that, the old picture of being in that community, waiting for an alert and then responding. What was that like? And then how does this relate to what you think when you're trying to make progress?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think that, early in my career as a volunteer fireman, there was a bit of excitement around it, adrenaline rush, and of course, you really don't see the destructive nature of wildfire just yet. As a new firefighter, you're kind of caught up in the as I would describe, the fun, if you will, and then as your career progresses and you become more involved in the management of not only wildfire but the forest and the ecosystems in the forest, you become aware of the devastating and destructive effects of fire in those scenarios. So it kind of transitioned for me over the 30 years from waiting at the jump base as a smoke jumper for the siren to go off and heading on the plane, to later in my career as a fire manager working on the type 1 teams, just watching mass disaster and displacement of people, animals, loss of homes, and unfortunately in some instances the loss of life.
Right. Were you around for the Boulder County fire?
I've been retired now from Boulder County. I was the fire management officer, chief fire officer in Wildfire for the county for about 15 years there.
Wow.
And I retired about 4 or 5 years ago. And so I try to stay away from local fire anymore. And right now my role is mainly, working for XPRIZE in this technical lead role.
And so when you think of these two tracks that were just described by Andrea, what does that feel like, knowing what crews and knowing how important time is, for example?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a bit of a spider web of answers and more questions around it. But you mentioned the Marshall Fire, so obviously that's just down the street from me here. And obviously, my department and all my, cohorts responded to that. And I will say that the Marshall Fire is an example of wildfire in a setting that we would have never expected. This isn't your typical WUI wildland urban interface setting where the Marshall Fire was. This is almost urban, almost city driven, right. Costco and Best Buy, and this is not out in the middle of the woods in Idaho. So I think that speaks a little bit to your question of what are the changes and why XPRIZE and why technology. Well, the fire environment's changed, meaning it's burning in areas where it never burned: the Arctic, Amazon, South America, as you mentioned starting the podcast, Central Europe. All these places, fire was part of the environment, but not the destructive fire. So I think that technology is available to be used to combat these destructive wildfires. And as Andrea mentioned, I think what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, that technology is siloed. In other words, there's a separation of innovators. And as Andrea pointed out, which is really realistic to me as a fire manager, is the opportunity to test these technologies in a real life setting, or as real as life as we can, because we're afraid to use new technologies on the fire ground when they haven't been tested. As you can imagine, Andy, there's chaos, right? And the last thing you want to do is introduce a piece of technology that is untested or unproven. So it really speaks to why I joined XPRIZE and what we're trying to do.
That's super important.
We're so lucky to have Jay's expertise. I mean, he's just invaluable for us.
Yeah, and I think part of the rollout today is with Lori Moore from the U.S. Fire Administration. Obviously, this is an arena where government can do some things, but why isn't this a space where there isn't government money? Why does it take private money?
Well, there is some really good efforts by the federal government and state and local governments. For example, here in Colorado, the Wildfire Center of Excellence, which is all around technology and wildfire. And there, throughout the Western states in particular, there's many more center of excellences or technology centers that the states and the local governments, like here in Boulder County, using AI technology to identify wildfires, quickly. So, we are, as a I'm not a government anymore, but as a former government employee, I can say that the government is working towards it. But like with everything, small, big government, there's budgets, there's limitations, there's regulations, and other hurdles that really, the money needs to go to fighting fire and saving lives and saving property and homes and forests. So to even think right now about putting any funding towards, technology advancements, sure, it's a great idea at a certain level, but we got to convince the taxpayers that it's the right idea. And when people are losing homes and property and like I said, lives, it's a real hard conversation to have. Hey, we want to redirect some funds to this effort, but we're still losing, thousands of homes a year and lives lost. So it puts the government, local and federal, in a tough position, to be honest with you. And so again, tying it back to our competition in X Prize, we offer a safe space for innovators and government collaborators, which is one of the reasons I joined the X Prize, is because we don't have an agenda, a political agenda. Our agenda is to bring technology to solve global problems, and this one is so complex and has so many hurdles, both financial and just ecological, that this safe space we're creating is going to make a difference.
I would just add there, Andy, that also some, research out of Pew was showing that states are exhausting their wildfire budget well before, the season's over. And
Right.
Other interesting research out of Australian National University was showing that early detection of wildfire can actually help us save those budgets by putting out fires instead of having to tap into what you need to be able to put out a really big fire. And so I think that's a really great place where our the technology coming out of this is going to be able to help us address that, and therefore really create some opportunities for these private partnerships.
Yeah, I'm showing, this is something I tweeted a year or two ago, shows just how fast, this is time lapse from one of those webcams, but you can just see the power and scope of what's going on here and the speed of it. This is an area that had not burned. The last time it burned was in the 1920s, which of course gets at one of the other huge issues here. The paradox of having forests that really should burn, including really big fires. And I guess in your work, you'll have to be figuring out, once you have the technology, there will be areas where you kind of want it to burn, and then areas where you don't want it to burn. But that's really that's a larger scope question, right? Still having this capacity feels really important.
I'll let Jay dive into that deeper, but I think that really is part of where these solutions are going to play such a big role. They allow wildfire managers to make those decisions and to have the tools that they need when they need them. And so being able to put out a fire autonomously, if you've got lots of spot fires, can then allow you to decide where you're going to put your resources for other larger events.
Is there an example also from a previous X Prize that feels applicable to what you hope to see with this new one for wildfire? Maybe Andrea, you could start.
Sure. Yeah. So right now, X Prize has the X Prize Rainforest, which is a competition to be able to identify biodiversity. They are just about to do semifinals, which will take place soon. And that is also using drones, a lot of drones and a lot of other similar type of tech. It is in a similar type of, environment. While they're in a rainforest, we're going to be on the ground with wildfire, but a lot of similarities. And what we hope to be able to have with the Rainforest Prize is really the ability to do these rapid biodiversity inventories, finding as many species as possible in, what we know are really difficult terrain and areas within our deepest rainforests. And so that, I think, is a really inspiring one for me. I've worked in biodiversity conservation for over 2 decades.
Right.
I know how much time and effort it takes to be able to identify biodiversity. And so that's one where they're going to be out there, and different teams are going to be competing and the one that can identify the most biodiversity the fastest, it will win.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's the same here, potentially. The
Jay, do
speed
you
and
have
speed and scalability, I guess, are keys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to just share one example. I think pretty amazing stuff actually from the competition around rainforest. So we're doing our semifinal testing in Singapore, and obviously a lot of this is going to be aerial based mapping, as Andrea said, and that uses drones. I mean, or UAVs, whatever you want to call it. Well, you know, X Prize was able to break a lot of regulatory barriers in that country that really has set the stage for innovation across the globe, and specifically, you know, flying drones outside of the line of sight. So even in the States here, that is a requirement by all drone operators. And we were able to actually work with the Singapore government and find solutions to that. You know, with wildfire, I see similar regulatory barriers that we're going to have to overcome, but we've already set the stage, and I feel confident that that's going to allow us to really test these solutions in an environment that validates them. That
sounds great. Well, yeah, I've been tracking the Rainforest Project. I was involved a little bit on, for full disclosure, with some aspects of that back in the day, and maybe we'll do another Sustain Wet webcast on that too. So that I guess by elevating, getting the front end investment from private or foundation sources, you're able to sort of get things to a point where a country like Singapore or the United States or wherever can then say, oh, these are serious players. Let's do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, and I think you know, again, just the ability to come into those scenarios with no political agenda, no strings attached. We're not selling anything. We're just trying to offer help. And you know, once you get past that, well, what is your angle? I think that you know, X Prize is in a position that no other organization is, and so it's really exciting to be part of that as this prize launches.
In your own head, do you have a sense, without being prescriptive, of what might ultimately fill the gap? What would that look like?
I have to admit, when this opportunity started to surface for me, I was on the fence of actually competing. Because, you know, I think that I've been fortunate enough to see, you know, everything from, you know, in fire management, from jumping out of airplanes with parachutes that were still designed after the 1935 parachute that the first smoke jumpers used, and that, you know, no movement forward for many years in that technology. So you know, I see a lot of things. I mean, recently I saw a drone washing a house. So pressure washing a house has nothing to do with wildfire, but let me explain this. So it was connected to an outside water source, but it was able to basically pressure wash the house, the windows, the building windows autonomously.
Right.
And to me, that is like, wow, that's on the verge of like solving this problem, because two of the main issues in what we're seeking is, you know, this remote fire detection. So these are going to be areas that, you know, to even get to, even as a smoke jumper or a heli repeller, you're going to have that lag time of, you know, spooling up the airplane or the aircraft and loading everybody up, and then there's a lot of safety protocols, and so you're losing minutes and seconds. And you know, just like with in EMS with the golden hour of heart attack and those sort of things, we do have that golden hour of wildfire, and we have to now think about that hour has been reduced, as Andrea said, to 10 minutes. And even best in class today, I argue those numbers of 30 minutes. I've never, you know, unless you're just happen to be in the area, you know, even getting to a wildfire, the access is impossible. So to your point about detection, you know, part of that detection, in fact, I was answering an email to a mapping company, a virtual mapping company, Topo Maps, and they asked me what are the biggest challenges of mapping and of wildfire, and one of them was just access. Like you know, it takes us 20 minutes to access, to figure out access, let alone to find access. So all these issues.
Yeah, and I think that for that space-based detection, you know, the idea really is that this is going to provide a global detection system. And so for places in the world where they don't have access to the technology, being able to just identify where those fires are happening, and in providing the specificity to here are the fires and these are the characteristics of that fire is going to be a real game changer.
Well, I'm glad again that you're up to this task. Let's see how it all works out in the long run. And this is the timeline again. There's a couple of deadlines, right, for how that works.
Right. So it is a 4-year competition in total, but we have the 2 tracks, and the space-based track is more of what I call a sprint. It is 22 months. Registration for our 2 tracks opens this Friday. And so teams can start learning more and start registering in our systems. For space-based, registration ends in August of this year. And then for the other track, it's a 36 to 42 month. So we have a little bit longer of a timeline. And therefore, we also have registration that goes through November. And so that allows for a little bit more time. And we do, teams can register for both tracks. There's nothing that prevents them from not being able to pursue both. It is whatever they feel they're up to.
This is all great. And they're separate on Friday when the show is running. People can jump at 11 a.m. Eastern. I think there's an X Prize briefing on this, including quite a few people. So that there's some more information. This will run that morning. And it's great to have you part of this conversation. If anyone wonders about the urgency factor, I just got to go back to some of the webcasts I've done, particularly with the folks at Headwaters Economics who've been trying to help communities figure out how to live with fire. And it's really hard because some of them have kind of sprawled into areas that are fundamentally at risk. And as Jay said earlier, you know, the Marshall and Superior fires demonstrate that if you put a wood-built community, even in a grassland area, you're essentially, as I think it was Stephen Pine who said to me, essentially when you do that, you're just moving a forest. It's a forest's worth of wood that's been moved into what's now looks like a town or a city. And if you have that in an area that's prone to high winds and wildfire, invasive grasses and all that, there's a lot of urgency here. So thank you for being on the Sustained webcast today to talk about all this. And folks can go to xprize.org, I believe it is the
xprize.org/wildfire to learn more and to register.
I'll put that.
Yeah, and we'll be launching this Friday and in Washington, D.C. and people are welcome to, you know, watch it online as well.
Yeah, here's just one more image that shows you. This was Paradise, California, that had that horrible impact from fire that spread from a wire transmission line. We are building an expanding bullseye, and let's get past that. Thank you again. This is the Sustain What Columbia Climate School webcast. If you pop in, you can always get a hold of me through the various means around this video. If you have questions, I can feed them to the X Prize people, and that's it for today. Thank you again.